running a little late from the previous meeting, but I'm glad to be here. Basically, I do actually mostly organizational network analysis as opposed to social system mapping, although I've been doing more and more social system mapping and really love learning from the folks in this group. I always learn when I'm on these calls, so happy to be here with you all.
Perfect. Thanks so much for joining us. And Maya is also one of the people in the Master Mappers group too, working closely with myself, Jim, Christine, and Drew Mackey, who it sounds like Matthew and you all know. You may notice that one person absent from today's conversation is Tim Hansen, who's also the co-developer and founder of sumApp, which means we will not be having Tim's tech tip breakout today. But that is okay, because I'm actually going to turn it over to Louise to introduce herself. Sounds like she's doing some really cool mapping work. I'm really excited to hear more about it. And so I'm going to turn it over to you, Louise, to introduce yourself, and I think jump right into the mapping as soon as Christine has said something else.
Well, we just didn't share the slide deck at all, so I just...
That's fine.
Fine, good, okay, done.
That wasn't work. Okay. Go ahead, Louise.
Okay, great. Can everyone hear me okay? Okay, so my name is Louise Clark. I am based at the Institute of Development Studies, which sits within the University of Sussex, which is just outside Brighton in the UK. I have been doing sort of social network analysis for really quite a lot of years now, which is frightening when I think how many. So I did a PhD on social network analysis starting back in 2004, trying to understand relationships within rural municipalities in Bolivia. And back in the day, it was very much about trying to figure out trying to figure out the networks, but also trying to figure out the software, which was, I mean, it's just changed exponentially. And one of the reasons that I'm very so excited to be here and to sort of talk with this sumApp community, because I really such a big fan of this tool compared to the life trying to find data back in the field, rural Bolivia, about 15 years ago. So that was my background, and I worked a lot around. So I've always been very much a visual mapper, specifically, you know, working with sort of rural communities in Bolivia. It was all about, so how can the network maps, how do they tell us a story? You know, I very quickly moved away from the sort of the much more of the metric side, because one of the issues was that, you know, we were working with very much with open networks. It was the sample sizes didn't really work, and so the numbers didn't really tell us a story. So I sort of very quickly moved away and said, well, what is the story that we can tell just through the visual piece? So that was sort of my background, and then I went and I've worked in various NGOs. I spent a few years with Oxfam in South America, came back to the UK with ActionAid International. So, and I sort of sit within the monitoring, evaluation, learning. So really trying to understand the impact. And so I've had sort of the network thinking on the back burner probably for a good 10 years until I came to IDS about 2 years ago, and all of a sudden I'm back in the game, and the tools have moved on, and really the work that we do here at IDS. So IDS is it's very much within the international development space. So it's really very much around sort of poverty alleviation, social inclusion, but because we're a research institute, sort of one of the key pieces of work is really trying to understand this dynamic of how research can influence policy, and that's the sort of the stickiness around that. So I'm going to now share my screen. Right, screen share. I have to, oh, and I did make an attempt to close so much down, and I'm going to go into this. So I need to move that. I need to move you all into a corner. Does that work?
I don't think we can actually see the panel of us on it. I'm not seeing us
Okay, that works.
Your
Okay.
version of us.
Okay, right. You're neatly tucked away.
Mhm.
So so this beautiful hairball that you see in front of you. So actually, I was going to go first to the sumApp. So last December, as part of a project that I work on, let me put this up. I work on a project called the Impact Initiative, and we work to try and support across portfolios of research to strengthen their policy linkages. And we held a conference last December in Delhi, with 100 plus delegates, probably about 2/3 of whom were researchers who were funded within this UK government funded international development research portfolio, and 1/3 of whom were sort of policy actors, practitioners, other people. So on the one hand, this meeting had various objectives. On the one hand, it was sort of celebrating 13 years of research funded by DFID and the Economic Social Research Council here in the UK. But on the other, it was this opportunity for networking. And this is what I'm really going to sort of try and talk about today is, so how do network maps help us network with our networking and understand the networking? Because we talk a lot, and we all talk about networking and the importance of networking and connections, but actually really understanding that and how their network maps can help us be really much more purposeful about that and structured and strategic around it. So that's sort of the framing of the work. So we were planning this this big meeting, and my boss said to me, well, I was at this meeting a couple of weeks ago and they were mapping the relationships, and can we do that? And I said, yeah, let's do that. And that is when well, I'd sort of seen sumApp, but that was my opportunity to really get involved and use sumApp. So sumApp was, I mean, it was amazing. So I'm just going to show you my sort of back page. So we asked people 2 questions. So one of the things that I was trying to understand was, from a sort of monitoring, it's like, okay, well, how do we show that this event where we've spent a lot of international development, so we talk about overseas development funding here in the UK. So we've spent taxpayers' money to bring all these people on a plane and bring them to a meeting in India, and how do we show that that was important and useful and beneficial and is going to sort of support with the poverty alleviation aims of this use of these funds. So we really wanted to understand a little bit and show, the added value of building relationships. So we sort of very, very simply, we set up this survey, and we wanted to keep it really, really simple. So we asked people 2 questions. How did you know people before the event? And then what was the nature of your interactions during the event? And we put in a couple of sort of descriptor type questions. What we hadn't anticipated, and was actually sort of huge added value in this context of an international meeting, was this sort of the sort of connections page that's created by sumApp. Because I don't know, I mean, certainly with for those people in the academic space, when you go to a conference and you go, I've read this person's paper, I've seen that they're going to be at this event, I really want to talk to them, and you get there and there's a couple of 100 delegates and you've got no idea what this person looks like, and so you're really sort of dependent upon these random encounters or waiting till that person might present. And so actually this interface with sumApp, we were really able to, so we launched it about a week before the conference as a way of saying, look, this is familiarize yourself with who else is going to be at the conference. So before we were even getting any network data, we were already sort of promoting the networking agenda of the meeting. These are my sort of colleagues and co-organizers, so I'm not showing you pictures, but we had pictures, and what we did, because we put a lot of organization, so we had pictures of a lot of the delegates, and sort of bios. So we actually front loaded this information ourselves into the sumApp, because what we were really interested in was getting the connection data, and we didn't want people to sort of have to spend a lot of time fiddling. I mean, some people did that, but I think really by sort of front ending, so as soon as people went in there, there was interesting information there, and they were really interested to click on these other people that were going to be at the event. And then when they click on them, they're asked about the level of their relationships. So this sort of started before we all got on a plane. I sent out the sumApp link in terms of what, think about who you want to meet. And then we all got to Delhi, and it was a big conference and lots of parallel sessions going on. And then we just had the tool running in the background the whole time. It was a 3-day event, and each morning we provided a live feedback of saying, okay, look, these are the event, these are the relationships, and so we were able to sort of show back to people how we were using the data, but also use it as so we were sort of encouraging people to use the tool, but by encouraging people to use the tool, we were encouraging them to really reach out and talk to each other, but we were also encouraging them to really think about why they were talking to each other. Right, I'm just going to check the chat. I'm going to go into the presentation now. Just a quick pause. Any questions? Is that all good? I'm assuming someone would chat.
Oh yeah, people were just commenting, Louise,
Okay.
that they really liked the connection questions that you use, and Maya also noted that practice of preloading that information, the picture and bios, that's just a great way to make this really accessible and welcoming. So great pro tips already.
Okay, great. So this is what we had, and now I'm going to go into a presentation. So then we so this created what the hairball. So this is a sort of all data, all connections, all actors. But I think what's really exciting here is that we did. I think of 105 delegates at the conference, we had over 90% usage rate of people that were that actually engaged with the app, and we captured every single person at the meeting, although there were people that were just sort of named and not names. One of the issues that we sort of, because of the feedback, one of the issues that we sort of anticipated was, and we're very, very conscious of GDPR, the data protection regulations here in the, I'll say within the EU, because we're still in the EU proudly, is this idea of anonymity and being clear with people how you're going to use their data. So in the front page of the survey, which I didn't show, there was a sort of tick box question of, please give us permission to use your name in the network map. And some people, some people tend to be a bit cautious there, but then the first thing that people do when they see a network map is they want to see where they are, and if they've made themselves anonymous, then they can't be seen. So then they have an incentive, once we start feeding the maps back, to go back and change that setting and let us show you who they are. So this is sort of the hairball of everything, but it just sort of shows how powerful this was. 1,633 connections between this sort of cohort of delegates, and then we start to hopefully this will work. Connections before the, so then we sort of break it down. And why is that? Okay. And look at, oh, I've gone too far. Sorry, the internet's a bit slow here today.
Louise, can I interject for just a second?
Yeah.
So for those of you who don't know this, if there are any who don't know this, in Kumu, you can actually make presentations. So it's sort of like a slide deck or a PowerPoint that's housed within Kumu itself that is interactive and that uses whatever map views you want to set up. So what Louise is doing right now is not sharing the base map with you. She's sharing the presentation that she created with this map. So that's why there's those two little arrows at the sides going back and forth, because it's more of a slide thing, even though it's interactive. So this is probably the first presentation we've seen
Oh, really? Okay.
using the Kumu presentation using that feature. And it's a great feature because you can really start to not just throw a bunch of information and some stuff in the side panel, but you can actually structure it to tell any number of stories that you want to tell. And you can make any number of presentations to go with any individual map. So you can start to tell different stories depending on who your audience is and how you want to walk them through the data. So that's a really valuable feature. So I was excited that Louise had used it and was sharing.
Yeah, and well, for me, it's great because it's sort of Kumu. I'm still trying to get my head really around Kumu. But one of the things I find, you go into Kumu and you think you've got it, and then you just change one thing and it changes the map view. So this is like stay.
Yeah.
I'm happy with this. Yeah. So and then publish it quickly. Yeah. So then we sort of to start to look at the different types of relationships. So we looked at, so this map here, and the writing's probably a bit small, but so these are all the people that have previously worked together, so these are already quite strong connections. And in terms of this idea of so part of what I do as the learning manager on this project is I'm responsible for our reporting, and one of our indicators is how we've built connections, because we're very much, we understand our role as a broker, but trying to count connections is really hard. And so unless you have sumApp, in which case it's really, really easy. So from a perspective of, so this, this demonstrates that, we've already got a core of actors within this space who have worked together, the different groups. So the blues are the grant holders that are part of this research portfolio. The reds are the organizers. The funders are quite key. There's an orange blip that shows up, and I think on the presentation function, you can still sort of zoom in on the different relationships, which is really, really nice. So this guy here, he comes up a lot because he's the funder, and everyone says they work with him, and every conversation he was named in was future work together. So we could sort of really start to break down the dynamic of what was happening. So I'm just going to go slow because I don't want to, my internet's slow. So then, and then this, I think this one is sort of quite key. I'm just going to zoom it in a little bit more. So and again, this is the funder here, but you've got quite a rich network down in this sort of bottom corner of people who were, putting the context of this is an academic conference. So these are people who are aware of each other's work, but haven't previously had an opportunity to connect to each other. So this is again showing the sort of potential value of bringing people together. And these are people who knew each other, who had communicated with each other, but not previously met. And again, some really sort of starting to see some strong potential brokers, and then being able to understand how these people are able to capitalize on a networking event is different from others, so that you'll have different sort of roles in terms of how people use events. and here are some of our brokers. So it's actually, you know, from that sort of hairball that we started off with, we started, you know, being able to use the network tools to really sort of drill down and just sort of draw out who are some of the key actors in here. And in terms of the work that I do in trying to understand the value of this conference, you know, these are the people then that I really, you know, they're key for me to reach out to and understand how have they been able to capitalize on this space. Oh, sorry. Okay, so then this is our other hairball, but quite exciting. So these are all the conversations that happened over our 3 days together in Delhi, which again, it's a bit like, okay, so people went to a conference and they all talked to each other. Wasn't that the point? And it's like, well, yes, it is, but actually we've never been able to just see that before, to see those conversations, and in terms of demonstrating the importance of bringing people together in a space. And I mean, I've got here, you know, the grants, the network, the actors are all codified by their sort of who they are, but you know, this is a very international space in terms of bringing together people, largely Europe, Africa, and Asia. So having those sort of conversations across different grants, and again, these sort of the spaces of bringing out these relationships. So then, you know, from this original hairball, then we get to, you know, this really now is the heart of it. This slide here is now we're getting into the added value of, well, these are the 200 of the sort of 1,000 connections in total. 267 between sort of 84 key players, so that people sort of, because the way that the questions were asked, so these were connections that people said, okay, I spoke to that person and I intend to follow it up. It wasn't just a nice conversation or you know, just a chat over a beer. It was like, actually our research could potentially be, we could potentially do research together, or we could potentially do some, you know, present our research in a policy space. So this is really important. Again, you see the importance of the funder, because this is very much, research is very much driven by these sort of funder relationships. But you know, that actually of these 267 connections, you know, nearly half of them, 45%, were made between people who had never met or communicated with each other before. You know, so then all of a sudden, in terms of trying to say and to explain to people what is brokerage and how we do it, this idea of bringing people together in spaces to identify ways of working together. And then I think I've got one final slide. So then these are the following up. I'm just going to grade that out a little bit. So these are then if you look at, you know, who were the real key, who were the movers and shakers at the event, these are the people that were really between, had a strong betweenness and were able to really sort of connect across different groups, and were really able to use that event. So when we use this data to do a series of semi-structured interviews to sort of really understand what people got out of the event. And now coming up, I mean, that they were done slightly too soon after the event for anything really to have happened. But these are that sort of understanding, yeah, sort of understanding networking, how you then use network maps to understand networking. So that's the end of that presentation. I think sort of a pause and some reflection. I do have another presentation, but let's sort of have more of a discussion, go back more into discussion mode. But I think Jim shared a paper that I wrote as using sort of doing some system mapping at this presentation. So if we've got sort of a few minutes left at the end, I could show you a little bit of an overview of that if there's interest.
Louise, how long has it been since this map was done? So
this was it's nearly a year ago now. This was last December, first week of December last year. So but it would be interesting now, and it's sort of always been pending to do a sort of more follow-up now in terms of where any of these relationships have led to work, but it's never got to the top of my to-do list. We have replicated this at another meeting, so the same approach within this project, to understand again I mean, it was really the funder was really interested in this in terms of understanding what we do with that, what comes out of those meetings.
And when you said you sort of, I don't remember your words, did something to share the map with the whole group each day?
Yeah.
Is that what you said? And
yeah.
what did you do? What did you talk about in that sharing?
It was very high level. It was pretty much a rallying call. So we sort of processed the data that had come in overnight and presented it back. We didn't have a presentation, but just sort of in Kumu. And essentially it was just like, look, we're networking, the network's growing, go out, network more. We sort of leave it up on the screen so people could come and have a look at it. We struggled with it a little bit because we couldn't print it off. It was 100 people. So obviously a network map with little names up on the screen was quite hard. So we didn't probably get that right, but just the fact that we were showing the map, and I think working in the research world and issues around data ethics and collecting data, so sort of making the visual data available, and actually now it's available to people through the presentation is I think really important, one of the really powerful benefits of this type of visualization.
So I have a question about the ongoing life of this map.
Mm-hmm.
So it was used in the conference. What have been applications after? Was it pretty much a once and done, or is it something that people have come back to and used to find connections or to update their information?
Essentially once and done, but that's partly just because of resources, my time. I'm sort of very, very busy, and we didn't really know, it was quite an experimental at the time, so we didn't really know whether it was going to work and what we were going to get. So yeah, I mean, the idea, there always sort of has been an intention of, and now I'm looking at the map for this presentation, going, right, we actually really need to follow up and go back to those people and do sort of like a 1 year on, who have you followed up with, who have you worked with. So that would be a sort of the interesting next conversation, I think, to have. But I mean, in terms of the people that were at the event, to a certain degree, it's a bit arbitrary who was available. There were other big international meetings happening at that time. But yeah, it's sort of the understanding, and for us, this understanding of brokerage is what has been really key for us, and being able to show that to people.
Louise, I have a follow-up question on Maya's. It seems to me that quality of relationship, beyond the operational connections, the quality of relationship would be really interesting to look at, and important to understand if we think that quality of relationship relates to what resources and information and willingness people have to connect and transfer. So I'm wondering if, there's a launch place from what you've got here that moves towards the developing quality of the relationships. In addition to, who's continued to follow up with each other.
Yeah, I mean, and that's what that follow-up looks like, is that we're actually sort of talking about this morning, a lot of these researchers have sort of gone to teach on each other's courses or gone on to sort of co-author papers, so that, what that looks like, we're trying to understand. I'm sort of quite limited. I have to get data on reporting that says, strengthened relationships, but I don't have to tell a sort of network of networkers that strengthening relationships is a tricky question to unravel, and how these relate. So it's really about understanding how relationships sort of build and grow over time. And part of what we do is the impact initiative. You know, this was a very big event for us, but we're sort of constantly working to pull researchers into policy spaces and sort of continue to grow those relationships, and looking for opportunities where the sort of policy practice research actors can all get together and engage. But yeah, no, it's really interesting, and that's why we sort of followed up with some qualitative interviews to really try and understand what's happening behind the lines.
Just as a side, do you mind unsharing your screen so that we can see? I think other people have joined. I'm not sure.
Yeah. And Seth, did I see you with your hand up? Did you have a question? Yeah.
Stop share. Okay.
Yeah, thank you. This is great, Louise. Thank you very much for sharing it. I had a number of questions. I'll start with just one. I want to understand a little bit better about the qualities of the relationships you asked for and got information on, about people's relationships prior to the event.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if I'm understanding it correctly, 3 of them, aware of work, previously communicated, and previously worked together, are kind of progressive with respect to one another.
Mm-hmm.
That is that you know, they're levels 1, 2, and 3, so to speak.
Yeah.
And higher level subsumes the lower level.
Yeah, exactly.
Whereas socially is on a different scale.
Yeah.
So that some people might have a social connection, but may not have worked together, or may have had a different level, you know, a varying level of the others. And so there's 2 different facets, or 2 different types of relationship there, which I guess, you know, one question is, how did you deal with that? It's not represented on the map easily. I think you can filter for it for sure, but it wouldn't be.
Oh, we've lost you.
Oh,
I think you've lost you right at your mic.
You just went silent.
But
Sorry.
it's okay.
there we go.
Did you hear my question?
Yeah, I did hear the question. I missed the last bit, but I'll have a stab. I mean, because I've been doing this stuff for a long time, I just sort of I couldn't not include that type of relationship, because it is so important. I mean, I guess the assumption behind it was that if you're socially connected to someone in the same professional space, you're generally going to be aware of what the other person is working on, and possibly looking for opportunities to connect and network with each other as you see fit. So I mean, that's an assumption, and you know, people could have studied together and not worked together at all in that space. But it's really, I mean, that to me is, I guess for me, the people that I know professionally, that I'd say I know socially, I would always sort of look for opportunities for us to work together if they arose. I mean, that's me. I'm a sociable person. So
yeah, I guess one way it could have been represented. I'm not at all being critical. I'm just trying to think out loud here. Is that with the first facet, which is, you know, the degree of connection being the awareness or previously communicated work together, that could be represented by thickness of line.
Yeah.
And then socially could be overlaid as a color.
Yeah.
So that they might have a color or not.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, I think that's true. And I mean, I think one of the things that I haven't raised actually was because the sort of 2-way nature of relationships,
right.
that actually there were very, very few, and this, I think this is if, you know, if I was ever to get this round to writing up as a paper, this would be a big question mark over sort of the rigor, because actually the vast majority of the relationships were framed differently from different. So we had one guy, I just made me laugh. My boss was like, he said he knows me socially. What? And you know, then it creates that sort of dynamic. But even and I think that the example of the DFID representative who was at the meeting, everyone who spoke with him it was a plan for a follow-up and we will work together in the future. He just had lots of conversations, you know, because he has to be very careful. So everyone who spoke to him thought, oh yeah, this is commitment. I'll be getting some more DFID funding coming my way. And he just thought he'd heard about lots of interesting research. So that piece, I would say, is probably one of the weaknesses in this, that it's, even though we sort of, you know, the way that we set out the relationships, understanding that is very subjective. I suppose if I was to do it again, I'd probably sort of try and explain what I meant by that, but we just didn't want to overload people with information. So there's also experimenting and letting people interpret what these mean. In, you know, for them, but so there's a degree of subjectivity, and I haven't
reciprocity is a big question.
Yeah,
always.
and I haven't sort of gone back and crunched that data, the data from that perspective. I just unfortunately haven't had time.
Good, thank you.
Because I think
really.
One last point there is, I think the other thing is that there's a huge, this has now generated just a huge Excel spreadsheet. I mean, it's the richest, and as I said at the beginning, I'm not a quant person, but a sort of a much more quantitative network mapper, and even sort of some of my colleagues here who do statistical analysis. You know, there's a real richness within that data set that you know, we've looked at the visual and had a, you know, this is nice, and it tells a story of what happened at the event, but there's a lot more that you could really drill down and sort of understand that data, which I haven't done, and don't really have the skills to do. But
Louise, a question I had was, what kinds of questions did you put in the survey, so that, like, how much information were people able to get about one another's work? I mean, so as aside from the connection questions, the actual about me or the survey questions, how did you use those to help people think about being strategic in their
we actually, to be honest, we had a technical glitch there, and I think it was because we added the question on the anonymity. So, do we have permission to use your name? But we only had 3 questions. We were like, what sort of organization do you work for? What are your key thematic interests at this conference? And then the third question, which was added after the data started to generate. So we had a glitch that data never saved. And it all happened too fast to really worry about, because we were getting good data, and it didn't matter. I mean, we had put the bios, and we'd sort of asked for bios from people for the conference, and actually it was the people that added their own bios, the bios were better, and they were much sort of sorted. The scene I had, you know, we had these really long bios and they didn't fit in the space, and it was actually nicer for people to write their own. But I don't. Yeah, that wasn't. We were really trying to focus on getting the connection data. So that was our real interest, and we really sort of sort of cut everything right back, so that the emphasis would be on the network data.
I think it's stunning how you nailed your objective, which is to show the value of the conference. I mean, that's sort of so cool. And I just wanted to jump on the fact that I imagine you were gratified by the 90% participation rate. And I just want to say, I did this for an event 2 weeks ahead of time, and 300 people, 285 of them mapped. Unbelievable. And it was because it was promoted and people were excited by the event. And then another fellow, Ben Roberts, just did an event and had the registration automatically map. So as they registered for the event, they filled out the survey. He got a very high percentage of, there's 300 people on his map. And it was just prior to the event, 2-3 weeks. So I think there's something about the way you promote an event and the and how you use it as you did in the mornings that create participation, at least for that moment.
Yeah. I mean, the meeting was called the Power of Partnerships. So, you know, it was about the partnerships. And I think, I mean, another thing that we really wanted was to show the research policy partnerships, and that hasn't. We unfortunately there were some other big policy events happening. It's sort of an end of year. Everyone sort of wants to get their big meetings out of the way. So some of the big sort of policy people that we had hoped would be at the event weren't there. So it was very sort of heavily researcher dominated, which wasn't our sort of original objective. So had we had a more even split of researchers to sort of policy access practitioners, I think there would have been an even more interesting story to tell. But that was because of the sort of the nature of who was at the event, not because of any weaknesses in, you know, the tool showed that we could do it, and hopefully in the future we will. We're planning a big event for in Ethiopia next year, so hopefully this will be a part of that as well.
Yeah, I mean, I have to say, Louise, your map has been, I'm so glad that I'm at this on-ramp because I really enjoyed seeing your map. One of the things that I'm really inspired by after watching your presentation is, you know, we've really, in our network, been trying to wrap our arms around emergence to really find a way to map what we would describe as like the ripple effects of the network, right? We know that we're setting conditions for people to be collaborative, and that does happen in our network space, and we know that those relationships also transfer into other collaboration, other work outside of the network. So we've been really interested in like thinking about how we may start like collecting that. And there was one question that you asked that was really kind of like, oh, an aha moment for me, where you asked people like something to the effect of like, did this relationship produce work that happened outside this meeting or whatever? That was like a light bulb for me, like, wow, we could be asking our members that type of question and then following up with them to gather those stories, to hear those narratives, and to start to be able to do a better job then of showing this ripple effect of the network. So I really, really appreciated that.
Great. Yeah, I mean, I think that's key. It's, you know, it's the as we said, sort of emphasizing the importance of networking and for people to actually see what that looks like. But then actually, yeah, I mean, that this helps us to understand what the stories are we need to, you know, what the questions are we need to ask and who we need to ask them of. So lots, you know, lots going on.
Christine, I think we might have time for maybe one more question. Does that seem right? Or was there anything from the registration that we wanted to bring up here?
So actually, there's nothing, no one who put a question in the registration form has shown up, so we don't need to go to registration form questions. I was thinking we might, just because I'm watching this conversation between Matthew and Maya, about coding the different chapters. Actually, Matthew, if you just put that in your survey form, then people can just, you won't have to do like any extra work. Just ask them to check off which chapters they're in, and then you can use that easily as a filter in Kumu. Maya, is that what you were thinking also? Or am I misinterpreting?
Yeah, no, I think that's right. The assumption I had made is that the survey was already done and that couldn't have been asked as a question in sumApp. But yes, asking it straight away in sumApp would of course be the easiest thing to do.
And can I just check, would it then be easy to aggregate the kind of the quality of connection for, say, you know, the 50 people in one chapter? Can you then, instead of having 50 different numbers for the quality of connection, if you're asking that, could you then aggregate it to just get one overall number? Does that make sense?
You could, not without, okay, this gets a little wonky. You would need to make numbers instead, like if you had not without doing some extra work in a spreadsheet outside of sumApp. So if you're gonna just take the live link and feed it from here to here, you can't do that. If you take a little detour into a Google spreadsheet, you can assign a number, a rank number to the connection questions and then do like a weighted average connection. And then you could see that in the stats at the bottom. But you have to use a numbered response rather than a text response. And it's hard for people to understand a numbered response. So, I mean, you could, if you wanted to get complicated, put numbered responses in your connection tile, in the connection thing, and then spell out in the description, you know, select 1 if, select 2 if, select 3 if, so that all sumApp outputs is a number. You could do that. But yeah, so hopefully that helps.
Yeah,
so
thanks.
Sarah, yeah, I'm thinking maybe, yeah, turn it over to you and you can do whatever the next, whatever the boss
Well,
says.
first off,
is
let's
the
say
next
goodbye to
step.
Lisa. It sounds like Lisa has to leave. So thank you so much for joining us, Lisa, today.
Thanks, Lisa.
You know,
Thanks, everyone. Sorry to leave early.
It's okay.
Oh, that's okay. You know, what we do like to do as we're closing these is to get a little bit of feedback from all of you about your experience from today. Just was there anything that you thought worked really well, or conversely, like anything that you found did not work as well?
Worked great. I loved it.
Thanks, Katie.
Thanks, Katie.
I particularly liked having the article and then also the Kumu link, which Jim sent, because I was able to, while Louise was talking, go back and forth and dive a little bit deeper. And I haven't read the article yet, but I'm glad to have it, and I will read it after this call.
Yeah, I mean, the article it's not on the social network. It's just, it was something that I did at the same event, in terms of understanding the research policy interface. And we also used Kumu to then sort of map the system. So it's not the same, but it's relevant and related. So I did manage to get that one written up. Unfortunately, I haven't managed to write this piece up yet, but it's great to sort of have a refresh and sort of think, because you do things and then you move on and you forget about them. So it's nice to go, okay, that was cool what we did. So yeah, hopefully sort of maybe a chance to revisit 1 year on and finally sort of write up some of the lessons from this.
So
thank you.
I was going to wrap up. So we usually say, so we have a few different this time we're doing a couple things a little bit differently. One of which is Tim wasn't here to do tech questions. And the other one is we usually have an additional half an hour, and we're not going to do that this time. So we'll just wrap up now. So if anybody has any last just contributions they want to say before we wrap up, that'd be great. But I'm just putting it out there, we're not doing the extra half hour.
So I'd like to well, thank Louise and say this was great. It does continue to generate questions that we only have so much time to talk about, and we don't have the extra half hour. So I don't know how open you are, Louise, to getting emails and following up on some questions.
Yeah, I'm open. I'm sort of just, I've got a big meeting on Wednesday.
There's hesitancy there, I understand.
Yeah. I'm intermittent. You can catch me at a good time. I like talking about this stuff. Let's put it like that. So, but I'm also quite busy, so I will do my best.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, thanks very much.
Okay. And sometimes actually getting questions helps you to think about what you're learning. So, and I do need to write this up. So hopefully, you'll be sort of there'll be something to share at some stage soon-ish.
Well,
yeah,
definitely.
I want to thank you. It was an incredible demonstration of a very narrow kind of thing, and you just demonstrated it very well. And the value of it seems applicable to so many different situations. About just knowing that those kinds of meetings will create the kinds of connections that were not there before, and then you can figure out what to do about developing them. But anyway, thank you for that.
Great. Well, I'm glad it was useful, and thank you for inviting me.
Definitely share when you have the write-up done. Definitely share it with us, and I will send it to the rest of our readers if you want me to. Yeah, that'd be great. Good. Thanks. Thank you so much. It's been really wonderful to see your approach and hear your thinking.
Thanks a lot.
Yeah,
Great.
thanks so much.
Thank
Louise.
you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye.
All right, bye.
So Jim, I forgot to mention that last piece to you.
What's that?
I forgot to mention the last piece about not doing the extra half hour to you. Sorry.
Oh, no, that's great.
Do you want to stop
What kind of
recording?
thing?